Scary telling.
My grandmother was always a bit eccentric, so when she passed away and started communicating with me from beyond the grave, I wasn't entirely surprised. At first, it was just little things, like finding her favorite brooch in a drawer or smelling her signature perfume when I entered her room. But then, the screaming started. It was in the middle of the night when it first happened. I woke up to a blood-curdling scream that seemed to be coming from right beside me. I bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, but there was no one there. I thought it was just a nightmare, but the next night it happened again. This time, I was more prepared. I grabbed my phone and recorded the sound, just in case anyone didn't believe me. It was unmistakably my grandmother's voice, but it was distorted and filled with terror. I didn't know what to do, so I just tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. But the screams continued every night at the same time. I started to lose sleep and became paranoid, always checking over my shoulder for some unseen presence. I tried talking to my friends about it, but they just laughed and told me it was my imagination. That's why I decided to investigate on my own. I went to my grandmother's old house, which was now abandoned, and searched for anything that could give me answers. In her attic, I found an old diary that she had kept for years, detailing her experiences with the supernatural. It was there that I learned the truth about what was happening to me. My grandmother had been a psychic, able to communicate with spirits and see things that others couldn't. But one day, she encountered something so terrifying that it drove her to madness. She called it the Screaming Ghost, a malevolent spirit that haunted her every waking moment. It screamed and tormented her, making her life a living hell. She tried everything she could to get rid of it, from exorcisms to seances, but nothing worked. In the end, she was forced to live with the ghost, hearing its screams day and night until she passed away. And now, it seemed that the Screaming Ghost had found a new victim in me. I tried to ignore it, but the screams only got louder and more frequent. They followed me everywhere, even when I left the house. People would stare at me on the street, wondering why I was screaming like a banshee in broad daylight. I became a recluse, afraid to leave my home and afraid to sleep. But one night, I had a dream that changed everything. In the dream, my grandmother appeared to me, her face filled with sadness. "I'm sorry," she said. "I never wanted this for you." I woke up in a cold sweat, knowing what I had to do. I went back to her old house, armed with the diary and a sense of determination. I performed the same rituals that she had tried all those years ago, hoping that they would work for me. And to my surprise, they did. The Screaming Ghost vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a faint echo of its screams. I was free from its clutches, finally able to sleep soundly without fear. But the experience left me changed. I realized that the supernatural was real, and that some things were better left alone. I still think about my grandmother, and wonder what other secrets she took with her to the other side. But for now, I'm just grateful for the silence. I thought I had found the perfect guy. He was charming, handsome, and always knew how to make me laugh. We had been dating for 6 months when I discovered something about him that turned my world upside down. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and we were lounging on the couch watching TV. My boyfriend, James, got up to get a drink from the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. On the coffee table, tucked away behind some magazines, was a small wooden box. I couldn't resist the temptation to peek inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The box was full of trinkets and keepsakes, each one carefully labeled with a name and a date. I I recognized some of the names. They were all ex-girlfriends of James. At first, I thought it was just a strange habit. Maybe he liked to keep mementos of his past relationships as a way of remembering the good times. But then I saw the dates. They were all recent, and they all ended with the same year. The year that James and I started dating. I confronted James about it, and he didn't deny anything. He told me that he had a hobby of collecting souvenirs from his ex-girlfriends. I was horrified, but I didn't think he was dangerous. That was my mistake. A few weeks later, James and I went on a weekend trip to a secluded cabin in the woods. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway, but something about the place gave me the creeps. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That feeling only got worse when we discovered a hidden room in the cabin. It was small, cramped, and filled with shelves lined with boxes just like the one I had seen on our coffee table. Only this time, there were more of them, and they were all labeled with different names. I turned to James, hoping he would explain what was going on, but he just smiled and said, "Surprise." That's when I realized that I was in grave danger. James wasn't just a collector of souvenirs. He was a murderer, and I was his next victim. I tried to run, but the cabin was too isolated. There was no way to escape. James locked me in the hidden room, telling me that I would be his most prized possession. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I lost all sense of time. I was trapped, alone, and at the mercy of a killer. James would come to visit me every day, bringing food, water, and the occasional trinket to add to his collection. He would talk to me like we were still a happy couple, as if I hadn't seen the true darkness in his soul. But I wasn't going to be his next trophy. I had to find a way out. I searched the room for anything that could help me, and that's when I found it. A loose brick in the wall, big enough for me to slip through. It took all my strength to break the brick and squeeze through the hole. I ran through the woods, not looking back until I was miles away from the cabin. I was never able to prove that James was a murderer. The police couldn't find any evidence to link him to the missing women. But I knew the truth. And every time I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound of James's footsteps as he walked towards the hidden room, ready to add another trinket to his collection. I have a recurring dream where I'm murdered by a man I've never met before. It's always the same man, and the details of the dream are always the same. He's tall, with a strong build, and piercing eyes that seem to look right through me. In the dream, he stalks me through a dark alleyway, and just when I think I'm safe, he appears behind me and plunges a knife into my back. I always wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I thought the dream was just a silly figment of my imagination, something I'd laugh off in the morning. But as the dreams continued, I began to feel a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. It was as if the man in my dreams was real, and he was coming for me. One day, I went on a blind date with a man my friend had set me up with. When I arrived at the restaurant, I felt my heart skip a beat. The man sitting at the table was the same man from my dreams. I tried to rationalize it, thinking that it was just a coincidence, but my gut told me otherwise. We made small talk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. He had a strange glint in his eye, and I felt like he was sizing me up, like I was nothing more than a piece of meat to him. I made an excuse to leave early, saying that I had an early morning meeting the next day. As I walked home, my mind raced with thoughts of the man from my dreams. Was it possible that he was real? Had I met my own killer on a blind date? I couldn't believe it, but the fear inside me wouldn't go away. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything except the man from my dreams and the man I'd met on the blind date. I did some digging online, and I found out that the man's name was Richard, and that he had a criminal record. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me even more suspicious. One night, I woke up to a noise in my apartment. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I heard footsteps coming from the hallway, slow and deliberate. I tried to get up, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I was paralyzed with fear. The door to my bedroom creaked open, and I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was Richard, the man from my dreams. He was holding a knife in his hand, the same knife he used to kill me in my dreams. I screamed, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. Richard walked slowly towards me, a twisted grin on his face. He raised the knife, ready to strike. Just as he was about to plunge the knife into my chest, I woke up, gasping for air. It was all just a dream. Or was it? The next day, I went to the police and told them everything. They arrested Richard, and he was charged with attempted murder. It turned out that he had been stalking me for weeks, watching me from afar, and planning to kill me. I don't know how I managed to survive that night, but I do know one thing. My dreams were a warning, a message from my subconscious that I needed to be careful. I'm just glad I listened. Now, I make sure to listen to my dreams, to pay attention to the signs that my mind is trying to give me. Who knows, maybe they'll save my life again. I stumbled into the kitchen, groggy and disoriented from lack of sleep. My eyes slowly focused on the counter, and I saw a bottle of scotch that I hadn't seen before. It was my best friend's favorite brand, the same kind he used to drink all the time. But that was impossible. He died in a drunk driving accident 6 years ago. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but when I opened them again, the bottle was still there, taunting me. It was as if my friend was reaching out from beyond the grave, reminding me of his love for scotch and his tragic end. At first, I tried to ignore the bottle, to push it to the back of my mind, but it was always there, like a specter haunting me. I couldn't help but wonder if my friend's ghost was somehow responsible for the bottle's appearance. I knew it sounded crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the days passed, the bottle seemed to take on a life of its own. It would move around the kitchen, appearing in different places each time I saw it. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Was my friend's ghost trying to tell me something? Was he trying to warn me about something? One night, I was alone in the house, and I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like the bottle was rattling on the counter. I slowly made my way to the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got there, I saw the bottle shaking violently, as if it was trying to break free from its invisible bonds. Suddenly, the shaking stopped, and the bottle started to glow with an otherworldly light. I felt a chill run down my spine as I saw a figure appear behind the bottle, a ghostly image of my friend. He looked at me with pleading eyes and said, "I need your help. I'm stuck here, and I can't move on until I find peace." I was shocked and terrified, but I couldn't ignore the desperation in his voice. I asked him what I could do to help, and he told me that he needed me to find the person responsible for his death. He said that he couldn't rest until justice had been served. I knew it was a tall order, but I promised to do everything I could to find the culprit. I started by going through old police reports and newspaper articles, trying to piece together the events of the night my friend died. After weeks of research, I finally found a lead. There was a witness who had seen the accident and reported that the driver of the other car had been drinking. I tracked down the driver's address and confronted him. He denied everything at first, but when I presented him with the evidence, he broke down and confessed. He said that he had been drinking and driving that night and that he had regretted it ever since. I went back to my friend's ghost and told him what I had discovered. He looked at me with a mixture of sadness and relief and said, "Thank you. Now, I can finally rest." With those words, the ghostly image of my friend disappeared, and the bottle of scotch on the counter vanished with it. I was left alone in the kitchen, wondering if what had just happened was real or just my imagination. Years have passed since that night, and I still think about my friend and the ghostly bottle. I don't know if I'll ever understand what really happened, but one thing is for sure, I'll never forget the lesson I learned. Sometimes, the spirits of our loved ones linger on, waiting for us to help them find peace. And when they do, it can be a truly terrifying and life-changing experience. From that day forward, I made a promise to myself to live my life in a way that would honor my friend's memory, to never forget his love for scotch, and to always be on the lookout for signs from beyond the grave. Because you never know what ghostly bottle might appear on your kitchen counter, reminding you of the ones you've lost and the mysteries that still surround them. I've always been a bit of a night owl. It's not unusual for me to stay up late watching TV, but lately, I've been having some strange experiences with my television. It all started about a week ago. I was sitting on my couch, watching some mindless reality TV show when the TV suddenly turned off. I thought it was just a power outage, so I got up to check the lights, but everything else was still on. I shrugged it off and turned the TV back on, and it seemed to work fine. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Each time, the TV would turn off for no apparent reason. I started to get a little worried, but I figured it was just a glitch or something. However, things took a darker turn a few days later. One night, I was in my bedroom, getting ready for bed when I heard the TV turn on in the living room. I thought it was strange since I had turned it off before heading to bed, but I figured I must have forgotten. As I walked into the living room, I saw the TV screen flicker to life, and to my horror, I saw myself standing in the living room, staring at the camera. At first, I thought it was just a replay of some footage from earlier, but as I watched, I realized it was happening in real time. I could see myself moving, picking up things around the room, and even turning to face the camera. I was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. It was as if I was watching some sort of twisted horror movie starring myself. The TV kept showing me for what felt like hours, and I was too scared to even try turning it off. Eventually, I fell asleep from exhaustion, and when I woke up in the morning, everything seemed normal. But that was just the beginning of my nightmare. Over the next few days, the TV continued to turn on by itself, always showing me standing in the living room. It was like a sick game, and I was the unwilling player. I tried unplugging the TV, but it didn't make a difference. The TV would still turn on even when it was unplugged. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I decided to call in a paranormal investigator to see if they could help me figure out what was going on. When the investigator arrived, I explained everything that had been happening, and they immediately set up their equipment. As soon as they turned on their EMF detector, it started going crazy. The investigator told me that there was an incredibly strong electromagnetic field around the TV, even when it was turned off. They then started taking readings around the house and discovered that there were several other hotspots with similar readings. After a few hours of investigating, the investigator came to a chilling conclusion. They believed that there was a powerful, malevolent spirit that had attached itself to me and was using the TV to spy on me. The spirit was incredibly strong and was able to manipulate electromagnetic fields to its will. I was terrified. I had no idea what to do or how to get rid of this spirit. The investigator told me that they could try to perform a cleansing ritual, but it wouldn't be a guaranteed solution. I agreed to try anything, so we started the ritual. It was a long and intense process, but in the end, it seemed to work. The EMF readings around the house had gone back to normal, and the TV had stopped turning on by itself. I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and I was finally able to sleep soundly again. But every time I see my TV, I can't help but wonder if a malevolent spirit is still out there, waiting for its next victim. I'm scared that it might come back, or worse, that it might have found a new way to haunt me. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I swear I can feel a chill in the air, and I hear strange noises coming from the TV. I don't know if I'll ever be able to shake off the fear and paranoia that this experience has left me with. But one thing's for sure, I'll never look at my TV the same way again. I can't help but wonder what other horrors might be lurking within its screen. And I can only hope that I'll never find out. I thought it was the perfect engagement ring for my girlfriend. It was a beautiful, antique ring with a large diamond and intricate detailing. She loved it too and wore it all the time. But that all changed after a strange incident occurred. It was a warm summer night, and we were sitting on the couch watching a movie when we heard a strange noise coming from the bedroom. At first, I didn't think much of it, but when we heard it again, my girlfriend got up to investigate. She returned a few minutes later, pale and shaken. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. "I don't know, but my engagement ring is gone," she said, holding up her empty hand. We searched the entire house, but the ring was nowhere to be found. We eventually gave up and went to bed, both feeling uneasy. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Doors would open and close on their own, we heard footsteps in the hallway at night, and the air in the room would turn icy cold. We tried to ignore it, thinking it was just our imagination playing tricks on us, but things continued to escalate. One day, we decided to hold a garage sale to get rid of some of our old belongings. I decided to sell the engagement ring, hoping to get some money back for it. As I was setting up the sale, a strange woman approached me. "I'm interested in that ring," she said, pointing to the engagement ring. "I'll pay any price for it." I was taken aback by her eagerness and strange demeanor. She seemed almost desperate to have the ring. I agreed to sell it to her, but as soon as she took it, she vanished into thin air. After that, things only got worse. My girlfriend started having nightmares about the ring and became increasingly paranoid. She would see strange shadows and hear whispers in the middle of the night. We tried to get rid of the ring, but it kept appearing back in our house. One day, we decided to hire a paranormal investigator to try and get to the bottom of the strange occurrences. He discovered that the ring was cursed and had a dark history. The woman who sold it to us had died tragically, and her spirit was still attached to the ring, causing havoc wherever it went. We tried to remove the curse, but it was too late. The spirit of the woman had already latched onto us, and we were haunted for the rest of our lives. We eventually had to move out of the house, leaving everything behind, including the cursed engagement ring. So, if you ever come across an antique engagement ring for sale, beware. It may look beautiful, but it could be cursed and bring nothing but misery and terror. I was sitting in my study, engrossed in my work, when I heard it. A series of loud, hacking coughs coming from somewhere in the house. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe my wife was watching a movie or something, I thought. But then the coughing continued, and I began to grow uneasy. I got up from my desk and walked through the house, listening for the source of the coughs. But as I moved from room to room, the sound seemed to move with me, always just out of reach. It was like trying to catch a shadow. Finally, I heard my wife's voice calling out from upstairs. "Honey, are you okay? I heard you coughing." I called back up to her, confused. "I wasn't coughing. Did you hear someone else?" There was a moment of silence before my wife responded. "No, I don't think so. It sounded like it was coming from your study." My heart raced as I made my way back to the study, but when I got there, it was silent. I sat down at my desk again, feeling foolish for being so scared by a phantom cough. But then it started up again, louder and more persistent than before. I got up and started to search the room more thoroughly, checking behind furniture and opening closets. But there was nothing there. The coughing seemed to be coming from thin air. As the night wore on, the coughing continued, growing more and more intense. It was like something was trying to force its way into our world, using the coughs as a gateway. I could feel a presence in the house, something that didn't belong. And then, in the early hours of the morning, the coughing suddenly stopped. It was replaced by a low, menacing growl coming from just outside the study door. I froze, unsure of what to do. I was alone in the house with this thing, and I didn't know how to defend myself. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the growling stopped, and the house was silent once more. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that I had just been imagining things, that the coughing and growling were just a trick of my mind. But I knew deep down that something had happened that night, something that I couldn't explain. And then, one day, I came across an old diary in a dusty corner of the study. As I began to read it, I realized with growing horror that it belonged to the previous owner of the house, a man who had died under mysterious circumstances. The last entry in the diary described the man's final days, as he lay coughing and writhing in his bed, tormented by a presence that he couldn't see or explain. As I read those words, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I knew then that the coughing and growling that I had heard in my house were not just my imagination. Something was still here, lurking in the shadows, waiting to make itself known. I woke up to the feeling of a gentle kiss on my cheek. The sensation jolted me awake, and I opened my eyes to see my husband standing over me, smiling. He had come home late from a work event, and I had fallen asleep waiting for him. "Hi, honey," he whispered, leaning in to kiss me again. But as he did, I noticed something off about his appearance. His hair was tousled, and his suit was wrinkled and stained. He looked like he had been in a bar fight, not at a work event. "Are you okay?" I asked him, sitting up in bed. He shrugged it off, telling me that he had just had a few too many drinks and stumbled on his way home. I believed him at the time, and we both fell asleep shortly after. The next morning, I woke up to a text message from my husband. He had stayed over at a friend's house last night after the event and didn't come home until this morning. I was confused and scared. If my husband didn't come home last night, then who kissed me goodnight? I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my stomach. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream or a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. But then I heard it again, the soft sound of a kiss on my cheek. I turned around to see a dark figure looming over me, its face obscured by shadows. I froze, unable to move or scream as the figure leaned in to kiss me again. I could feel its cold, clammy lips against my skin, and the stench of decay filled my nostrils. It was then that I realized that the kiss wasn't one of affection or love, but of malice and death. I had let something into my home, and it was now too late to turn back. For weeks, I was tormented by the ghostly presence in my home. It would appear in the dead of night, whispering my name and breathing its foul breath on my face. I tried to ignore it, but it only grew bolder with each passing day. One night, as I lay in bed, the ghostly figure appeared before me once again. This time, I mustered up the courage to confront it. I demanded to know what it wanted from me, why it had chosen to haunt me in such a terrifying way. It spoke to me in a voice that sounded like nails on a chalkboard, telling me that it was once a man who had loved and lost. He had been killed in a bar fight, and had been wandering the earth ever since, searching for someone to take his place. He had chosen me, the woman who had been sleeping alone in her bed, as his next victim. And now, there was nothing I could do to stop him from claiming my life. The last thing I remember is the ghostly figure leaning in to kiss me one last time. This time, it was a kiss of death, and I felt my life slowly slip away. As I took my last breath, I saw my husband standing at the door, his face twisted in horror as he witnessed my demise. My body was found the next morning, lifeless and cold. My husband was questioned, but there was no evidence to tie him to the crime. He was devastated by my death, and he never fully recovered from the loss. As for the ghostly figure, it was never seen again. Some say that it found its peace after finally claiming its final victim, while others claim that it still haunts the homes of unsuspecting victims, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike again. I had always heard stories about haunted houses and creepy dolls, but I never believed in them. That is until I heard the wailing from the baby monitor. It was a Saturday night, and my daughter was with her mother over 200 miles away. I was home alone, trying to relax after a long week at work. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a baby crying coming from the monitor on my nightstand. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just a malfunction or interference from a neighbor's monitor. But the crying only grew louder and more insistent. I couldn't ignore it any longer, so I got up to check the monitor. As I approached the monitor, the crying stopped abruptly, and I could hear a faint whispering sound. It was like someone was speaking in hushed tones, just beyond the reach of my hearing. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and rationalize the situation, but I couldn't explain what was happening. Suddenly, the crying started again, louder and more desperate than before. I rushed to the monitor and saw something that chilled me to the bone. There, on the monitor screen, was a figure of a woman holding a baby. But it wasn't just any woman. Her eyes were empty, her skin a sickly pale, and her hair hung in clumps around her face. The baby in her arms was screaming, and I could see a dark stain on its onesie. I couldn't look away, and the longer I stared, the more real the image became. I knew I had to investigate, to see if there was anyone in the house. But as I left the bedroom, the crying stopped, and I could hear footsteps on the stairs. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder and more frantic, and I could hear someone sobbing. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the sounds were too real. Suddenly, the sobbing stopped, and I could hear a low whispering sound. It was coming from the living room, and I knew I had to investigate. As I entered the living room, I saw a woman standing in front of the fireplace. Her back was to me, and she was swaying back and forth, as if holding something. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I tried to get closer, but she moved away, keeping her back to me. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and my heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. Finally, she turned to face me, and I could see that she was holding a baby. But it wasn't just any baby. It was my daughter. I rushed forward, trying to take my daughter from her, but she moved away, keeping her back to me. I tried to grab her, but she was too fast, and I could feel her slipping away. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I was alone in the living room, my daughter safe and sound in her mother's arms over 200 miles away. But the memory of what I saw still haunts me to this day. The wailing from the baby monitor, the ghostly figure of the woman holding the crying baby, and the terrifying moment when she held my daughter in her arms. I never found out who or what was responsible for the haunting, but I know that I will never forget the terror I felt that night. And I know that I will always be watching the baby monitor, waiting for the wailing to start again. I used to love sleeping with my eyes closed tight, cocooned in my blankets like a warm, safe haven. But that all changed when I started hearing noises at night. At first, it was just a faint rustling in the darkness, like something moving around in the shadows. But as the nights went on, the noises grew louder and more persistent. I started to feel like I was being watched, like someone was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself that it was just my imagination. But every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the presence getting closer, creeping up on me like a predator stalking its prey. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom door open. I knew for a fact that I had locked it before going to bed, so I knew something was wrong. I got out of bed and peered into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. A figure, hunched over and crawling towards me like a spider. Its eyes glinted in the dim light, and I could see its long, bony fingers reaching out towards me. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if I was rooted to the spot, trapped in the monster's gaze. I could feel its hot breath on my face, and I knew that I was done for. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the monster vanished. I was left standing in the darkness, my heart racing and my body drenched in sweat. I knew then that I couldn't keep my eyes closed at night. The monster was real, and it was coming for me. I tried everything to keep it away. I installed security cameras, locked all the doors and windows, and even slept with a knife under my pillow. But no matter what I did, the monster always found a way to get to me. It wasn't until I started keeping my eyes open at night that things started to change. I would lie in bed, my eyes fixed on the darkness, waiting for the monster to come. And sometimes, I could see it lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. But as soon as I turned on the light, the monster would vanish. It was like it couldn't exist in the light, like it was some kind of supernatural being. I knew then that I had to find a way to defeat it. I started doing research, poring over ancient texts and folklore in search of a solution. And that's when I found it. The monster was a night stalker, a creature that preyed on those who were too scared to face their fears. Its power lay in the darkness, in the shadows that lurked just out of sight. But there was a way to defeat it. I had to face my fear, to stare it down and refuse to let it control me. And so, every night, I would lie in bed with my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. And every night, the monster would come. But now, I was ready for it. I would turn on the light, and the monster would vanish into thin air. It's been years since I first saw the Night Stalker, and I've never seen it again. But every now and then, I'll hear a faint rustling in the darkness, a reminder that it's still out there, waiting for its next victim.